Hello. Tonight, you wander slowly into a world older than memory itself, where the first rivers quietly shape the earliest human dreams beneath dim prehistoric skies. Somewhere between soft marshes and endless stars, long before kings rise or laws are carved into stone, you begin to notice how civilization first breathes beside moving water. Like a lantern flickering gently in endless darkness, warm night air drifts across the wide plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, carrying the faint scent of wet soil and tall reeds bending beside slow water. You walk carefully across dark ground softened by countless floods, while distant frogs hum softly from hidden mud. The silence feels ancient and enormous, rather like entering the world's oldest library after closing time without accidentally waking the librarian. Geologists, studying ancient Mesopotamia, believe this land once holds far more water than today. With broad wetlands stretching beneath cloudy bronze-colored skies during the late Stone Age. Moonlight glides across shallow pools like silver brushed onto worn metal. The rivers move patiently through flat earth, meandering as lazily as someone searching for snacks in the kitchen at midnight without turning on the lights. So, before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're creating here. As you settle deeper into tonight's journey, feel free to share your local time and location in the comments below. Somewhere far away, another quiet listener may also be sitting beside a dim lamp, hearing these ancient rivers move gently through the dark while the modern world slowly softens around them. Now, slowly dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan, letting the steady hum of the air fill the room. And in that gentle rhythm, we quietly step into tonight's journey together. You continue walking beside the ancient floodplains, where layers of soft silt gather year after year like folded blankets, spread carefully across the earth. Seasonal floods leave behind fertile mud that nourishes grasses, barley, and early wild grains. Even before cities exist, the land already behaves like a patient provider, quietly preparing dinner long before any guests actually arrive. The earliest communities settle close to the riverbanks, using reeds gathered from thick wetlands, weaving them carefully into walls and roofs that rustle softly during cool evening winds. Fires glow faintly inside small shelters, while families rest near baskets of fish and grain. The gentle crackling sounds travel through darkness, like whispers exchanged between tired travelers beside a distant roadside campfire. Archaeologists uncover traces of ancient reed houses buried beneath Mesopotamian soil, preserving evidence of some of humanity's first settled villages. At sites near Eridu, layers of mud, brick, and pottery reveal communities forming as early as the 5th millennium BCE. You imagine careful hands shaping wet clay slowly and thoughtfully, perhaps with the same concentration people now reserve for assembling difficult furniture without instructions. The night sky above Mesopotamia appears immense and startlingly clear, untouched by electric lights or crowded skylines. Stars reflect upon still marsh water until sky and earth seem gently connected through silver patterns trembling in darkness. Early people watch these skies carefully, noticing seasons through shifting constellations. Long before calendars exist, the heavens quietly become humanity's first dependable clock hanging above endless silence. You pause near a shallow inlet where water birds stand motionless among reeds taller than your shoulders. Scientists believe the wetter climate of prehistoric Mesopotamia supports abundant fish, migratory birds, and thick vegetation throughout these plains. The region feels calm and generous rather than harsh. Even mosquitoes probably thrive enthusiastically here, though, thankfully, history rarely builds monuments in their honor. Small groups gather near fires, while elders quietly repeat remembered stories about floods, changing seasons, and the invisible. Rhythms guiding survival beside unpredictable rivers. Nothing is written yet because writing itself has not emerged. knowledge moves only through memory and spoken words. Every lesson must remain alive inside human voices, carried carefully from one generation into the next like embers, protected from strong wind. You notice how slowly time seems to move across these plains? Without clocks, engines, or crowded roads, each day unfolds according to sunlight, temperature, and the changing movement of river water. Morning begins with birds and mist. Evening arrives with cooling winds and dim stars. Life feels measured. Not by urgency, but by repetition. Rather like bread rising patiently beneath a cloth-covered bowl. Ancient Mesopotamian wetlands also shape early cooperation between neighboring groups. Families share irrigation paths, fishing zones, and seasonal planting grounds, because survival depends upon predictable balance. Historians believe this gradual cooperation quietly lays foundations for organized society long before formal governments appear. In many ways, civilization begins less like a conquering army and more like neighbors, politely borrowing gardening tools across generations. Near Eridu, one of the oldest known cities on Earth, archaeologists discover ancient grain storage areas. Buried beneath layers of sediment and broken pottery, these storage spaces reveal something quietly revolutionary. People begin planning far beyond immediate survival. Harvests are preserved for future seasons. Communities prepare carefully for uncertainty ahead. Much like modern households storing extra batteries before a thunderstorm arrives during football season, as evening deepens, cool wind moves across the plains carrying the earthy scent of river mud and wet grass. The rivers themselves continue flowing steadily beneath pale moonlight, unconcerned with future empires or forgotten kings. No written laws govern this land yet. Instead, water quietly determines where people settle, when they plant crops, and how they survive together. Through changing seasons, you begin noticing how naturally order emerges, even without formal codes carved into stone. Shared habits develop around planting, fishing, and dividing labor within small settlements beside the marshes. People observe one another carefully and learn through repetition. Human behavior flows gently into patterns, much like the rivers, slowly shaping their own winding channels through soft earth over countless centuries. Far beyond these quiet villages, future kingdoms already sleep invisibly inside the landscape itself. Beneath layers of mud and reeds, the conditions for cities, temples, trade routes, and written law gradually gather strength without hurry. The rivers continue their patient work under moonlit skies. Somewhere in darkness, water laps softly against reeds while ancient humanity drifts peacefully beside the cradle of civilization. Morning light spreads slowly across the barley fields of ancient Sumer, turning wet irrigation channels into thin ribbons of pale gold beneath a quiet sky. You walk beside soft riverbanks, where fresh clay gathers after seasonal floods. In this peaceful landscape, ordinary mud begins transforming into something astonishingly durable. The earliest memory system humanity ever carefully creates. Near the water's edge, workers collect smooth clay and shape it gently into small tablets. Using practiced hands, darkened by sun and river soil, the surface remains cool and damp beneath their fingertips. Nothing about these tablets appears dramatic or grand. They resemble unfinished cookies left quietly beside a window, though fortunately much less tempting during long working afternoons. Around 3400 BC, the people of southern Mesopotamia begin pressing wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay using sharpened reeds and wooden styluses. Historians later named this writing system cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped in Latin. Each careful mark quietly preserves knowledge beyond fragile human memory and spoken tradition without grand ceremony or dramatic announcement. Written language slowly enters the human story beside the patient rivers of Mesopotamia. Early tablets record grain, livestock, and daily exchanges rather than heroic battles or royal victories. In cool clay rooms lit by soft daylight, humanity begins learning how to store memory outside the mind itself. You sit silently near a young Scribe practicing symbols beneath a shaded awning woven from reeds. He presses tiny shapes into clay with intense concentration while older teachers observe nearby. One mistake requires smoothing the surface and beginning again slowly. Ancient school exercises survive, even today, proving that frustrated students have existed for an impressively long portion of human civilization. The earliest written tablets rarely describe heroic battles or mighty rulers. Instead, they record grain shipments, sheep inventories, and jars of oil exchanged between neighboring communities. Some tablets carefully count beer supplies distributed to workers each day. In ancient Sumer, accounting arrives before literature. Civilization apparently decides that tracking snacks and beverages deserves immediate administrative attention, which feels surprisingly relatable across the centuries. As settlements grow larger, agriculture supports increasing populations throughout the fertile plains surrounding the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Carefully maintained irrigation canals distribute water evenly between farms, reducing conflict during dry seasons. Entire communities cooperate to repair channels after floods and storms. The work moves steadily across generations, like gardeners, tending the same enormous backyard without ever fully finishing the project. You wander through the rising city of Uruk, where mud brick homes cluster around narrow streets shaded by woven canopies and drying reeds. Archaeologists estimate that Uruk becomes one of the world's earliest true cities, possibly reaching 40,000 residents during its height. Even in antiquity, crowded streets probably inspire occasional sighs from exhausted pedestrians attempting peaceful afternoon walks through busy marketplaces. The city hums softly beneath warm sunlight as potters shape jars. Fishermen repair nets, and merchants organize baskets filled with dates and barley. Writing slowly becomes essential. For managing this growing complexity, simple memory no longer holds enough information for expanding trade and agriculture. Clay tablets begin functioning like the quiet administrative heartbeat of urban life beside the rivers at night. The desert sky opens above Mesopotamia with extraordinary clarity. Countless stars shimmer over rooftops and temple courtyards while cool winds drift through irrigation canals. You watch scribes carrying finished tablets into storage rooms lined carefully with shelves. Beneath these constellations, tiny markings pressed into clay quietly preserve promises. Debts, harvests, and agreements longer than spoken words ever could. Archaeologists later discover thousands of cuneiform tablets buried beneath ancient cities, many preserved because accidental fires harden the clay permanently, like pottery inside ovens. Ironically, destruction helps history survive. Some of humanity's earliest records endure precisely because buildings collapse and burn around them. Ancient scribes likely never imagined their office. Paperwork surviving longer than most royal palaces or famous monuments. Inside, quiet administrative rooms. Scribes sit cross-legged beside baskets of damp clay while sunlight filters softly through narrow openings in mud brick walls. Their work requires patience and consistency rather than dramatic inspiration. Each mark must remain clear and orderly. Watching them feels strangely calming. Rather like observing someone alphabetize bookshelves on a rainy afternoon while distant thunder rolls gently outside. You begin noticing how writing slowly changes the structure of society itself. Agreements no longer depend entirely upon memory or trust between individuals because records now exist independently of human voices. Trade becomes more organized. Resources are tracked more carefully. The written word introduces a quiet permanence into daily life. Like stones gradually reinforcing the edges of a winding riverbank, some historians believe cuneiform eventually contains more than 1,000 distinct symbols during its long development. Across Mesopotamian history, learning them requires years of disciplined study within temple schools. Scribes become respected specialists whose skills grant access to administration and trade. In many ways, they function like ancient data managers, though thankfully, without needing to remember complicated computer passwords before sunrise. Beyond the cities, farmers continue working peacefully beside irrigation channels carrying river water through flat agricultural lands. Oxen pull wooden plows slowly across damp soil while birds circle overhead searching for insects disturbed by cultivation. Life unfolds according to seasons rather than strict schedules. The land itself seems to breathe patiently beneath broad skies washed pale by afternoon heat and drifting dust. You pause beside a storage building where workers stack clay tablets into woven baskets for safekeeping. Some records detail grain taxes owed to temples, while others track livestock exchanged between settlements. These documents may appear ordinary, yet they quietly establish systems supporting larger cities and governments. Civilization advances, not only through conquest, but through careful organization of everyday responsibilities. As evening approaches, warm orange light settles gently across the canals and barley fields surrounding Uruk. Reflections shimmer upon still water while distant voices soften into murmurs carried by cooling winds. Nearby, a scribe finishes his final tablet beneath flickering lamplight. He presses one last symbol into damp clay with steady hands, preserving another small piece of human experience against time. Under the immense Mesopotamian sky, the first written symbols rest silently upon shelves of drying clay while stars emerge above the darkening plains. No one yet fully understands how deeply these markings will shape future civilizations. Still, beneath quiet constellations and drifting desert winds, humanity begins learning that memory itself can outlive the fragile boundaries of a single human life. Morning arrives gently over the Sumerian city-states as pale sunlight stretches across dry roads, pressed smooth by generations of steady footsteps. You walk beside merchants carrying wool, barley, olive oil, and woven baskets toward mudbrick gates warmed slowly by the rising sun. Their movements feel calm, practiced, and unhurried. Around you, the city awakens little by little, like an old household settling quietly into another familiar and carefully repeated day beside the rivers. Warm air drifts through narrow streets, lined with simple homes built closely together for shade and protection from seasonal heat. Anthropologists studying Mesopotamian settlements discover that many families organize their homes around small open courtyards containing wells or clay ovens. Daily routines repeat steadily across generations, rather like neighbors unknowingly performing the same choreography beneath slightly different skies. Inside these quiet courtyards, women grind grain into flour, while children carry jars of water balanced carefully against their hips. Older relatives sit beneath woven reed coverings, repairing baskets or shaping pottery beside cool walls. The rhythms of household life feel steady and unhurried. Even arguments likely soften quickly when everyone lives close enough to hear, absolutely everything through thin mud brick walls. You continue through the city as sunlight slowly brightens towering ziggurats, rising above clustered rooftops. These stepped temple structures dominate the skyline like artificial mountains built carefully from clay and patience. Priests oversee ceremonies there. But the temples also function as centers for grain storage, labor organization, and trade. Distribution throughout the surrounding agricultural communities, beside the river's archaeological evidence, suggests temples in cities like Ur and Uruk store enormous quantities of barley, dates, and livestock records within carefully managed administrative rooms. Workers move steadily through shaded corridors, carrying baskets of grain beneath painted walls. The atmosphere feels orderly rather than severe. One almost imagines ancient supervisors politely reminding exhausted laborers not to misplace 40 sacks of barley before lunchtime again, near the temple complex. Scribes sit quietly inside cool clay chambers, protected from the harsh afternoon sun. They press cuneiform symbols into damp tablets for hours at a time, recording taxes, trade agreements, and seasonal harvest figures. Their styluses tap softly against clay surfaces, with gentle repetition. The sound resembles steady rainfall against windows during a long evening spent safely indoors. You notice how little movement appears rushed within the city. Farmers arrive gradually from surrounding fields, with donkeys carrying vegetables, reeds, and bundles of wool for exchange at local markets. Fishermen unload catches beside irrigation canals, while potters arrange fresh vessels beneath shaded stalls. Economic life flows smoothly through familiar habits, much like river water finding the same channels season after season. Historians believe many Sumerian workers receive payment partly in barley or beer rather than coins, since currency systems remained limited during this early period. Records even describe carefully measured beer rations distributed to laborers, according to rank and occupation. Civilization apparently understands remarkably early that productive workers appreciate dependable refreshments after long days beneath the Mesopotamian sun. As afternoon heat settles across the city, shaded courtyards become gathering places for conversation and rest. Families share bread, lentils, onions, and dates, while children chase one another through narrow passageways cooled by damp reeds. Life unfolds with remarkable consistency. Across centuries, meals, chores, and conversations likely change less dramatically than modern smartphone designs released suspiciously every single year. Beyond the city walls, irrigation canals stretch outward through fertile farmland like carefully drawn lines upon soft earth. Maintaining these waterways requires cooperation between neighboring communities. Because floodwaters and droughts affect everyone together, seasonal labor becomes part of collective responsibility rather than personal ambition. The survival of one household depends quietly upon the reliability of many others working beside the same rivers. You pause beside a canal, where workers remove accumulated mud using wooden tools worn smooth through constant use. Their movements remain slow and practiced beneath broad skies filled with drifting birds. These canals sustain Sumerian agriculture for generations, allowing cities to expand steadily. In many ways, civilization here resembles gardening on a massive scale, though with slightly more accounting and considerably fewer decorative flower pots within the city. Legal customs already exist, even before formal law codes appear carved into stone monuments. Disputes over property, marriage, and trade are often resolved through shared traditions remembered collectively by elders, priests, and administrators. Rules survive through repetition and mutual expectation. Society maintains balance quietly, like musicians following familiar rhythms without needing written instructions during every performance. The great ziggurats also shaped spiritual life within Sumerian communities. Priests observe celestial patterns, organize rituals, and maintain temple economies, connecting religion closely with administration. To ordinary citizens, divine order and social order likely feel inseparable beneath these immense structures. Looking upward at towering temple stairways probably inspires both reverence and mild exhaustion about climbing all those steps repeatedly. By evening, warm winds move gently through streets, carrying the sense of baked bread, river mud, and distant cooking fires. Marketplaces begin emptying, while families gather inside lamplit homes protected by thick clay walls. The city softens into quiet conversation and flickering shadows. Somewhere nearby, a tired donkey probably expresses strong personal opinions regarding tomorrow's transportation schedule with impressive vocal determination. Archaeologists studying Sumerian skeletons and household remains discover evidence of both hardship and stability across these early urban societies. People work physically demanding lives, yet organized agriculture provides relatively dependable food supplies compared to earlier nomadic existence. Communities persist for centuries because daily systems remain predictable enough to support growing populations beside carefully maintained rivers and canals. You begin sensing how deeply repetition shapes these civilizations. Every season brings familiar floods, repairs, harvests, and trade cycles repeated, with only gradual variation across generations. Stability emerges not from dramatic authority, but through countless ordinary actions performed consistently over time. Like water polishing stone, routine slowly creates structures stronger and more enduring than individual ambition alone ever could. Night settles quietly across the Sumerian plains, while stars emerge above ziggurats and silent irrigation canals. Inside cool administrative rooms, scribes finish their final tablets before resting beside clay walls still warm from the fading sun. No grand law code governs every detail yet. Instead, custom, memory, and repetition guide society gently onward, as steady and dependable as the rivers themselves. As generations pass beside the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerian cities continue expanding slowly across the fertile plains. You walk along broad mud brick walls built carefully to protect growing populations and valuable grain supplies. The atmosphere feels organized rather than fearful. These walls resemble quiet boundaries around fragile cooperation. Like fences surrounding carefully tended gardens beside restless water, the increasing population of Mesopotamia creates new challenges for leaders, farmers, and temple administrators responsible for balancing irrigation systems and food storage. Water must be distributed fairly between farms during dry seasons, while grain reserves require careful protection against shortages. Civilization grows more interconnected each year, rather like an enormous household attempting to coordinate. Dinner for thousands of unexpectedly hungry relatives, workers carry baskets of clay, bricks beneath the warm afternoon sun while supervisors inspect newly reinforced gates overlooking dusty roads into the city. These construction projects continue for years, sometimes generations, becoming part of ordinary life itself. Ancient builders probably developed sore backs and mild complaints about management meetings long before such frustrations become timeless traditions within human civilization. Around 2100 BCE, King Yernamu of the city of Ur introduces one of the earliest known legal codes in recorded history. Centuries later, historians recover fragments of these ancient laws from clay tablets buried beneath the quiet ruins of Mesopotamia. The faded symbols remain preserved through dry desert air and the patient stillness of time. Unlike many later legal systems that emphasize severe punishment, the laws of Ur-Nammu often focus upon compensation, fairness, and restoring balance within everyday community life. Many disputes are resolved through measured repayment rather than harsh physical penalties. Beside the slow rivers of ancient Sumer, justice begins to resemble careful negotiation more than fear or conquest alone. You enter the city of Ur through gates shaded by tall mud-brick towers, glowing softly beneath evening light. Beyond them, narrow streets wind between homes, workshops, and temple courtyards filled with quiet activity. Legal order here feels woven gently into daily routines rather than imposed dramatically from above. The city breathes steadily, like a sleeping animal. Shifting peacefully beneath warm blankets during rainstorms, the surviving laws of Ur-Nammu address practical concerns familiar even to modern listeners. They discuss property disputes, marriage arrangements, compensation for injuries, and responsibilities between neighbors sharing agricultural resources. Many offenses result in financial payment rather than physical punishment. The approach feels surprisingly measured, as though ancient lawmakers already understand that endless conflict rarely improves anyone's afternoon. Inside administrative buildings, scribes continue pressing cuneiform symbols into clay tablets with patient precision while officials oversee trade agreements and tax records. Every detail matters because organized societies depend upon reliable information flowing between citizens, temples, and rulers. Bureaucracy quietly expands beside the rivers. Even ancient civilization eventually discovers that someone must always organize paperwork before absolutely anything gets accomplished properly. Archaeologists, studying Mesopotamian law codes, notice how often these systems attempt preventing escalation rather than encouraging revenge. Compensation allows disputes to settle without creating larger cycles of retaliation between families or communities. In many ways, these laws function like irrigation canals, guiding unpredictable human behavior into manageable directions. Society survives not through perfection, but through carefully maintained channels of balance and restraint. You pause beside a busy marketplace where merchants exchange wool, copper tools, barley, and pottery beneath woven shade coverings fluttering softly in warm wind. Legal agreements help support this growing commercial life by establishing expectations between strangers meeting through trade. Without predictable rules, markets become unstable. Civilization learns gradually that trust, like bread dough, requires consistent conditions to rise successfully. At the center of the massive ziggurat towers above surrounding neighborhoods, with calm authority beneath pale skies, priests, scribes, and administrators coordinate seasonal labor projects from nearby temple complexes, while workers repair canals and monitor grain reserves. Religion, governance, and economics remain deeply connected here. To ancient citizens, separating these responsibilities might seem as strange as separating rivers from water itself. Historians believe Yornamu's reign also includes major construction efforts, improving roads, irrigation systems, and temple restoration throughout southern Mesopotamia. Public works strengthen both agriculture and trade, while reinforcing royal legitimacy among surrounding communities. Even thousands of years ago, infrastructure projects quietly shape political stability. Apparently, humanity has always appreciated reliable roads, functional drainage, and fewer inconvenient puddles during rainy seasons as evening approaches. Cool shadows stretch slowly across the city walls, while guards take their positions beside heavy wooden gates reinforced with bronze fittings. Their work remains mostly uneventful during peaceful periods. They watch travelers arrive from distant settlements, carrying goods and stories beneath fading sunlight. The quiet rhythm of observation and routine becomes another invisible layer, supporting the stability of urban life beyond the walls. Irrigation canals shimmer beneath twilight skies, while farmers guide animals slowly home after long hours working fertile fields. Water remains the true foundation beneath every legal system and political structure within Mesopotamia. Without coordinated management of rivers and crops, no city could survive for long. Civilization rests ultimately upon mud, water, patience, and surprisingly complicated schedules. Regarding barley storage, you notice how the legal systems emerging here still feel deeply human, despite their antiquity. The laws do not attempt controlling every detail of existence. Instead, they acknowledge ordinary imperfections within trade, family life, and shared labor. Ancient lawmakers seem less interested in abstract ideals than practical coexistence. Their approach resembles careful gardening, trimming conflicts before they overgrow the fragile pathways connecting communities together. Fragments of Yornamu's code survive only partially today because time gradually breaks clay tablets and buries cities beneath layers of earth and silence. Yet these surviving lines reveal an extraordinary moment when human societies begin recording expectations openly for future generations. Law becomes visible rather than purely remembered. Quietly, authority starts moving from spoken custom into permanent written form beside the rivers. Night settles slowly over the mud-brick walls of Urwile. Warm desert air drifts through narrow streets, scented with baked grain, clay dust, and distant cooking fires, glowing softly behind wooden doors. Guards remain still beside the city gates, listening as wind moves gently across bricks, holding the last warmth of daylight. Above silent canals and sleeping courtyards, patient stars continue shining over humanity's earliest attempts at balance, law, and organized order. Great changes in Mesopotamian history rarely arrive with sudden noise or dramatic warnings. You notice them slowly, like rivers adjusting their paths after many seasons of quiet flooding across soft plains. New layers of silt, gather unnoticed. Beside familiar banks, over time, entire landscapes transform gently. Beneath steady skies, while ordinary people continue planting crops and repairing canals. The fertile lands surrounding the Tigris and Euphrates, rivers support growing populations. For centuries, yet even rich soil eventually changes beneath constant cultivation. Salts slowly accumulate within irrigated farmland as water evaporates beneath intense heat. Harvests become less dependable in certain southern regions. The earth itself begins whispering subtle instructions that communities must either adapt carefully or gradually relocate elsewhere. You walk beside a canal where farmers study drying soil with thoughtful expressions, while evening wind moves gently through brittle reeds nearby. Nothing about the moment feels dramatic. Yet historians believe environmental pressures quietly influence migration patterns throughout ancient Mesopotamia. Civilization responds slowly to ecological change, much like households rearranging furniture. Over many years, without fully noticing how different the room eventually appears. As agricultural conditions shift, some communities begin moving northward, toward regions with fresher soil and more reliable rainfall. Others expand westward through developing trade networks connecting distant settlements across broad deserts and river valleys. These migrations unfold gradually across generations, rather than single lifetimes. Ancient families likely experienced them less as historical turning points and more as practical decisions about tomorrow's harvest. Trade routes become increasingly important, as cities require resources unavailable within their immediate surroundings. Timber arrives from distant mountains, metals travel through caravan networks, and fine stones cross vast landscapes before reaching Mesopotamian workshops. Economic connections stretch farther each decade. Civilization starts behaving like an enormous woven fabric, with every thread depending quietly upon countless others remaining securely in place. Modern scholars believe competition over resources, trade access, and agricultural stability contributes significantly to the expansion of early Mesopotamian political power. Larger alliances offer greater security during periods of environmental uncertainty and economic change. Cooperation increasingly extends beyond individual city-states. Human societies begin organizing across broader territories, rather like neighbors slowly realizing that maintaining the entire neighborhood matters as much as protecting single homes. You travel northward through dusty roads, linking settlements surrounded by canals, grain fields, and grazing animals moving slowly. Beneath pale skies, merchants exchange goods beneath shaded courtyards, while scribes record transactions carefully upon clay tablets. Information travels steadily along these same routes. In many ways, ancient trade networks function rather like slow-moving rivers, made entirely from conversations, contracts, and persistent donkeys carrying heavy baskets. Around 2334 BCE, a ruler named Sargon rises within the city of Akkad and gradually unites numerous Sumerian city-states beneath centralized authority. Historians later describe this achievement as one of humanity's first large territorial empires. Yet the expansion unfolds through administration, trade control, diplomacy, and organized military systems rather than endless dramatic conquest alone. Power spreads patiently beside the rivers, like slowly advancing shade. Very little physical evidence from Akkad itself survives today because the city's exact location remains uncertain beneath Mesopotamian earth. Historians reconstruct empire primarily through inscriptions and administrative records preserved elsewhere across the region. There is something strangely calming about entire capitals disappearing quietly beneath time. Even the most powerful cities eventually become archaeological mysteries, waiting politely beneath layers of dust and silence. Under Sargon's rule, roads, trade routes, and communication networks begin linking distant territories more closely than ever before. Officials supervise grain collection, labor systems, and military administration across expanding lands. Stretching far beyond the older boundaries of individual Sumerian city-states, The empire slowly grows into a connected landscape of movement. An organized exchange. New forms of coordination emerge between diverse communities, living beside rivers, deserts, and caravan roads throughout Mesopotamia. Administrative records multiply quietly inside cool clay rooms where scribes work for long hours beneath oil lamps. Ancient bureaucracy becomes steadily stronger, gently proving that organized paperwork remains one of civilization's oldest and most surprisingly durable survival skills. You pause beside travelers, resting beneath woven shelters as twilight settles softly over caravan routes, crossing dry plains toward distant cities. They share bread, dates, and water, while exchanging stories gathered from settlements many days apart. These quiet interactions help bind vast territories together. Empires depend not only upon rulers and armies, but upon ordinary people continuing familiar routines across enormous connected landscapes. Inscriptions describing Sargon often portray him as favored by divine authority and destined for leadership beneath Mesopotamian heavens. Later, legends even claim he begins life abandoned within a basket floating upon river water before rising unexpectedly to power. Ancient storytelling clearly appreciates symbolic river imagery. Humanity apparently discovers very early that dramatic origin stories improve public memory considerably more than ordinary administrative biographies. Despite political transformation, daily life within villages and cities continues following familiar rhythms beside canals and fields. Farmers still repair irrigation channels each season. Potters still shape clay beneath shaded workshops. Families still gather within cool courtyards after sunset. Historical change often feels surprisingly ordinary to those living through it. Rather like noticing a child has grown taller only after many quiet months pass unnoticed, you begin understanding how ancient empires emerge not through isolated moments, but through countless gradual adjustments involving climate, trade, migration, and administration. Rivers shift their courses slowly across generations, and human societies behave much the same way. Power flows where resources, communication, and cooperation allow stability to form. Civilization moves less like lightning and more like water, patiently, reshaping Earth beneath persistent currents. Even organized armies, within Sargon's expanding empire, function partly to secure trade routes, agricultural regions, and administrative systems supporting economic stability. Military power exists alongside infrastructure, governance, and communication, rather than replacing them entirely. Ancient rulers understand that controlling territory requires more than victory alone. Maintaining roads, canals, and grain supplies ultimately matters just as much as commanding soldiers beneath royal banners. As night settles across Mesopotamia, cool winds move gently over quiet canals, reflecting scattered stars upon dark water. Somewhere beyond distant fields, caravans continue their slow journeys between cities now linked beneath Akkadian authority. Yet the rivers flow onward unchanged beneath the moonlight. In the long memory of deserts and ancient floodplains, even empires pass softly like clouds drifting across still evening water. Centuries pass after the age of Sargon, and new cities gradually rise beside the Euphrates River beneath broad Mesopotamian skies. You approach Babylon slowly through dusty roads lined with palms and irrigated fields shimmering beneath evening light. The city grows steadily into a center of trade, administration, and political influence. Like embers quietly becoming a larger and warmer fire, Babylon does not appear suddenly from empty land. Instead, generations of merchants, laborers, scribes, and farmers slowly shape its growth through ordinary effort repeated across centuries. Boats drift along the Euphrates, carrying grain, wool, copper, and timber into crowded docks beside the city walls. Even ancient commercial centers apparently depend heavily upon reliable shipping schedules and people complaining politely about delayed deliveries. Warm wind moves through. Babylon's streets carrying the scent of baked bread, clay dust, and river water reflecting the fading glow of sunset. You pass through busy markets, where traders bargain softly beneath woven awnings, while scribes organize records inside shaded rooms. The atmosphere feels orderly and patient. Civilization here unfolds like a carefully maintained garden, spreading gradually beside slow-moving water. Around 1754 BCE, King Hammurabi orders the creation of a monumental legal inscription carved into a towering block of black basalt, standing over 2 meters high. Historians later recognize this monument as one of the most complete surviving legal codes from the ancient world. Its dark, polished surface reflects torchlight softly, almost like still water beneath. Stars during a calm desert evening, you stand quietly before the great stone stele, while workers and officials move respectfully through. Babylon's palace halls nearby. Rows of cuneiform symbols descend across the basalt in astonishing detail, preserving nearly 282 legal provisions. The carving requires immense labor and precision. Ancient stoneworkers probably dream occasionally about taking a long vacation somewhere entirely free from complicated wedge-shaped writing assignments. Interestingly, Hammurabi's code is not humanity's first legal system. Earlier rulers, including Yornamu and Lipitishtar, already established written laws generations before Babylon rises to prominence. Yet Hammurabi's code survives in unusually complete form through the centuries, allowing modern historians remarkable insight into Mesopotamian legal thought. Sometimes historical fame depends less upon originality and more upon simply avoiding destruction beneath collapsing buildings. At the top of the basalt monument, a carved relief depicts Hammurabi standing respectfully before Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god associated with justice and divine order. Rays emerge from the deity's shoulders while the king receives symbols of authority. The scene suggests that human law reflects a greater cosmic balance. Even kings appear small beneath the immense structure of the universe surrounding them. Inside Babylon's administrative centers, scribes carefully copy legal texts onto clay tablets used throughout the kingdom. Contracts involving marriage, trade, inheritance, and property disputes rely increasingly upon standardized legal expectations. Written law provides consistency across expanding territories connected through commerce and agriculture. Civilization begins organizing itself with greater precision, rather like someone finally labeling storage jars. After years of hopeful guessing, you wander through temple courtyards, illuminated by flickering torchlight as evening deepens over the Euphrates River. Shadows move slowly across mud brick walls, painted in faded colors. While distant musicians play soft rhythms somewhere beyond the palace district, the atmosphere remains calm rather than severe. Babylon feels less like a place ruled by fear and more like a city attempting careful coordination beneath immense historical pressure. Historians studying Hammurabi's reign note that Babylon expands not only through military campaigns, but also through administrative reforms, irrigation improvements, and economic organization supporting regional stability. Roads and canals receive continued maintenance throughout his territory. Ancient rulers understand that managing water and transportation matters enormously. Empires, much like sleepy travelers, function far better when basic infrastructure remains dependable and reasonably organized. The legal code itself addresses surprisingly practical concerns involving agriculture, wages, property damage, and family responsibilities. Certain laws establish payments owed when irrigation neglect causes flooding to neighboring fields. Others regulate builders whose unsafe houses collapse upon residents. Reading these provisions today feels oddly familiar. Humanity apparently spends thousands of years repeatedly discovering that poor construction decisions tend to upset absolutely everyone involved. As night settles across Babylon, oil lamps glow softly within palace halls, where officials discuss grain storage, canal repairs, and trade agreements extending across Mesopotamia. The empire depends upon predictable systems functioning steadily beneath royal authority. Yet outside the administrative centers, ordinary families continue preparing meals, tending animals, and resting within cool courtyards, much as their ancestors always have. Beside the rivers, you notice how the basalt stele transforms law into something visible and permanent within public space. Earlier customs often survive through memory or scattered records. But Hammurabi's monument presents authority physically before the community. The stone itself feels solid and enduring beneath torchlight. Written law begins resembling architecture, carefully constructed to support social stability across generations of changing human lives. Archaeologists eventually rediscovered this stele in 1901 at Susa, in present-day Iran, where it had been carried centuries earlier by conquering rulers, buried beneath earth for millennia. The monument survives remarkably intact despite shifting empires and forgotten dynasties. There is something strangely peaceful about ancient stones outlasting countless political ambitions while remaining perfectly unconcerned about historical fame or academic debates. Beyond Babylon's walls, irrigation canals continue carrying river water quietly through fertile farmland beneath silver moonlight. Farmers wake before dawn tomorrow exactly as previous generations have done for centuries. Legal systems may evolve, rulers may rise, and cities may expand. Yet life beside the rivers still depends ultimately upon water, soil, cooperation, and the patient repetition of ordinary seasonal work. Torch flames flicker gently across the dark basalt surface while long rows of cuneiform symbols appear almost to ripple like slow waves crossing still nighttime water. Warm light dances softly along the carved stone as scribes and officials move quietly through Babylon's shadowed halls. Beyond the palace walls, evening settles gradually across the broad and ancient plains beside the Euphrates River. Somewhere outside the city, cool wind drifts through reeds beneath distant stars reflected faintly upon dark canals and sleeping water. In Babylon's calm evening glow, human law no longer feels like domination alone, but more like one small expression within a far older cosmic rhythm. The universe continues moving patiently above kings, temples, and stone inscriptions, worn gently by the passage of centuries. The great basalt stele of Hammurabi stands quietly beneath the warm Babylonian sky, covered with nearly 282 legal provisions carved carefully into dark stone. You trace the lines slowly with your eyes, while evening light softens their sharp edge. The laws speak about trade, marriage, labor, agriculture, and irrigation, revealing a civilization attempting to organize daily life with remarkable precision. Many of the laws focus upon practical concerns that shape ordinary existence beside the Euphrates River. Builders must construct houses carefully. Farmers must maintain irrigation canals responsibly. Merchants must honor agreements involving silver, grain, and livestock. These regulations create expectations supporting social stability across expanding cities. Ancient civilization, much like modern neighborhoods, apparently functions best when everyone remembers basic responsibilities toward one another. You walk through Babylon's crowded marketplace, where wool traders negotiate prices beneath woven awnings while scribes carefully record transactions upon clay tablets nearby. Legal systems provide structure for this growing commercial world, allowing strangers to exchange goods with greater confidence. Trust becomes partly institutional, rather than purely personal. Civilization slowly learns that predictable rules can travel farther than individual reputations across busy trade networks. Some provisions within Hammurabi's code appear strikingly severe to modern readers, especially punishments involving bodily injury or theft. Yet historians remind us these laws reflect the hierarchical structure of Babylonian society, where consequences often vary according to social rank and occupation. Justice remains deeply connected to status. Ancient legal systems, like ancient architecture, reveal the assumptions quietly supporting the societies that build them. The code distinguishes between nobles, common citizens, and enslaved individuals, assigning different penalties and compensations depending upon a person's position within Babylonian life. Such distinctions may feel uncomfortable today, yet they offer valuable insight into historical realities rather than idealized myths. Human societies rarely begin with equality fully formed. Progress usually arrives slowly, like rivers reshaping stone through patient and persistent movement. You pause beside irrigation channels, carrying cool water toward distant fields, while farmers inspect embankments beneath fading sunlight. Several laws address canal maintenance because neglected waterways can destroy neighboring crops through flooding or drought. These regulations reveal how deeply survival depends upon shared environmental management. Even powerful kingdoms ultimately rely upon ordinary people remembering to repair extremely practical things at appropriate seasonal moments. Inside administrative buildings, scribes continue copying legal provisions onto clay tablets used by officials and judges throughout Babylonian territories. Written law allows rulers to extend authority more consistently across distant regions connected through trade and agriculture. Power becomes increasingly visible and standardized. In many ways, bureaucracy itself starts behaving like a carefully engineered canal system directing human behavior through predictable institutional channels. You notice something quietly revolutionary within this process. Laws are no longer hidden entirely within oral traditions, remembered only by priests or elders. They are displayed publicly upon stone, where citizens can physically encounter them. Authority becomes something recorded and visible. Civilization begins trusting written systems more deeply, rather like travelers preferring maps drawn clearly upon parchment instead of uncertain directions shouted across noisy streets at night. Torchlight flickers gently against the basalt stele, while shadows move across carved cuneiform symbols resembling ripples upon dark water. Officials and visitors passing through palace halls likely pause occasionally to study the monument's imposing surface. The stone communicates permanence and order without speaking aloud. Even silence itself begins serving administrative purposes. Within organized urban civilization beside the rivers, centuries later, Babylon declines beneath the movements of newer empires, crossing Mesopotamia's fertile plains and desert trade routes. The stele eventually disappears from public memory after Elamite rulers carry it away to the city of Susa, following military campaigns buried beneath earth and forgotten dynasties. The monument rests silently through generations of migration, conflict, rebuilding, and slowly drifting desert sands. In 1901, French archaeologists excavating at Susa rediscovered the basalt stele remarkably preserved beneath layers of accumulated history. Scholars immediately recognized the importance of the inscription for understanding ancient legal systems and Mesopotamian civilization. The moment feels strangely peaceful despite its significance. After thousands of silent years underground, the stone simply waits patiently for human curiosity to uncover it once again. You imagine the quiet excitement within the archaeological camp as workers brush dust gently away from ancient symbols, untouched by sunlight for millennia. Each line reconnects modern observers with voices from distant antiquity preserved through clay, stone, and careful craftsmanship. History survives not only through grand monuments, but through fragile persistence. Sometimes civilization resembles a message folded carefully into earth for future strangers to discover. Today, the stele rests far from Babylon, inside museum galleries where visitors stand silently before its polished, black surface beneath controlled lighting. Some study the legal details closely, while others simply observe the immense age carried within the stone itself. Museums create curious forms of stillness. People travel enormous distances just to spend quiet moments respectfully staring at very old objects beneath surprisingly comfortable air conditioning beyond the museum walls. The modern world continues moving quickly through crowded streets filled with glowing screens and constant information. Yet the ancient code remains strangely Recognizable despite the centuries separating Babylon from contemporary life, humans still negotiate property, labor, marriage, and responsibility. The details evolve endlessly, but the underlying desire for predictable social order continues flowing steadily through civilization. Like water through old canals, you begin sensing how written law changes humanity's relationship with time itself. Spoken customs fade icily as generations pass, but inscriptions preserve intentions beyond individual memory. Kings disappear, cities collapse, and languages transform, yet written symbols remain waiting beneath dust and silence. Civilization gradually discovers that ideas carved carefully enough can outlast even the empires that first create and defend them. Cool evening wind drifts slowly across the distant plains of Mesopotamia while stars emerge above forgotten ruins, resting quietly beneath layers of sand and earth. Somewhere below those ancient landscapes, countless unread clay tablets still sleep in darkness beside collapsed walls. Buried courtyards and abandoned canals, long emptied by changing rivers and the slow movement of time, like fine dust, carried endlessly through desert air beneath moonlit skies. The traces of early law never disappear completely from human memory. Ancient ideas about balance, order, and community continue moving softly through history, across generations and civilizations, beneath changing kingdoms and wandering rivers. Those distant voices remain patient and enduring, resting quietly beneath the stars above the silent plains. After Babylon's great centuries begin fading into memory, new empires continue crossing Mesopotamia like changing seasons, drifting over endless plains. You travel slowly through landscapes where old canals still glimmer beneath sunlight, while fresh rulers inherit ancient cities already shaped by countless generations. History here rarely stops completely. It simply changes direction softly, like wind moving through tall desert grass at dusk. The Assyrians gradually rise to prominence in northern Mesopotamia, building powerful administrative centers connected through roads, trade systems, and carefully organized armies. Their cities grow vast and heavily fortified beneath broad skies washed pale by heat and dust. Yet, even within imperial capitals, ordinary routines continue steadily. Someone, somewhere, is always baking bread, repairing sandals, or searching patiently for misplaced livestock. You approach Nineveh beside the Tigris River, while afternoon light settles gently upon enormous stone walls surrounding the city. Gardens, workshops, temples, and administrative buildings spread across the landscape in orderly patterns shaped by royal planning. The empire appears immense and disciplined. Still, drifting birds circle lazily above the rooftops, apparently unconcerned with the complicated ambitions of earthly governments below. Within Nineveh, Assyrian rulers established great libraries filled with thousands of clay tablets stored carefully inside cool stone chambers, protected from heat and moisture. Scribes collect administrative records, religious texts, scientific observations, myths, and diplomatic correspondence from across Mesopotamia. Knowledge itself becomes an imperial project. Ancient librarians, much like modern ones, quietly dedicate their lives to preventing civilization from losing absolutely everything important. One ruler in particular, King Ashurbanipal, develops an extraordinary interest in preserving written knowledge during the 7th century BCE. Historians believe he personally studies cuneiform writing and actively orders texts copied and gathered from throughout his empire. His library eventually contains tens of thousands of tablets. Somewhere within those vast collections, exhausted scribes probably dream wistfully about shorter documents and fewer administrative duplicates. You walk slowly through imagined library halls, lined with shelves of clay tablets, stacked neatly beside carved stone walls. Oil lamps flicker softly while scribes organize records beneath painted ceilings, darkened slightly by smoke. The atmosphere feels cool, quiet, and deliberate. Outside, empires continue shifting across the Near East, yet inside these chambers, human memory rests patiently within carefully preserved symbols pressed into clay. Centuries later, archaeologists excavating Nineveh rediscover portions of Ashurbanipal's great library, buried beneath collapsed structures and layers of earth. Among the recovered texts appears one of humanity's oldest surviving literary masterpieces, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story preserves ancient reflections upon friendship, mortality, kingship, and the search for meaning. Even across thousands of years, people continue asking remarkably familiar questions beneath changing skies. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes journeys through cedar forests, encounters with gods, and grief following personal loss. Yet, many moments within the text feel unexpectedly intimate and human, despite their immense antiquity. Ancient literature often reveals how little emotional experience truly changes across civilizations. Apparently, humans have spent millennia contemplating life's mysteries, while also making questionable decisions during stressful situations involving authority and personal ambition. Beyond the great libraries and palace walls, daily life continues. With quiet regularity across the towns and villages of Mesopotamia, farmers guide slow oxen through open fields, while children carry water jars beside canals, shimmering beneath the afternoon sun. Craftsmen repair rooftops before seasonal rains return, and fishermen move gently through marshlands in narrow reed boats, shaped much like those of earlier generations. History changes gradually around these ordinary lives, yet familiar routines continue shaping most human experience beside the rivers. Meals are prepared, tools repaired, and crops harvested beneath skies that appear almost unchanged across centuries. While kings build empires and scribes preserve laws upon clay tablets, countless quiet households continue moving patiently through the steady rhythm of everyday existence. You rest beside a canal where reeds sway gently beneath warm evening wind while distant voices drift softly from nearby homes. The water reflects old mud brick walls, glowing orange beneath the setting sun. Dynasties rise and disappear beyond the horizon, yet these familiar scenes endure across centuries. Civilization persists less through monuments alone than through repeated acts of maintenance, cultivation, and quiet cooperation between neighbors. The Assyrians also develop impressive infrastructure throughout their empire, including roads, aqueducts, and administrative networks linking distant provinces. With remarkable efficiency, royal messengers travel rapidly between cities, carrying orders and information across vast territories. Communication strengthens imperial control while supporting trade and governance. Even ancient empires eventually discover that functioning transportation systems reduce many unnecessary complications and deeply frustrated conversations. At times, Assyrian military campaigns become fierce and expansive. Yet the rhythm of ordinary existence continues beneath official histories focused upon kings and conquest. Most people spend their lives concerned with crops, weather, taxes, repairs, and family obligations rather than dramatic imperial events. Archaeology often reveals this quieter reality. The majority of human history unfolds through small routines, repeated patiently beneath slow and indifferent suns. You notice birds gliding silently above ancient walls, while long shadows stretch across weathered bricks worn smooth by centuries of heat and wind. Their movement feels almost dreamlike against the fading sky. These cities carry memories layered deeply within stone, clay, and dust. Time settles gently upon them, softening once sharp edges until even former centers of power appear calm beneath evening light and drifting silence. Historians today reconstruct Mesopotamian life through countless surviving fragments, broken tablets, household tools, irrigation channels, and partially collapsed foundations buried beneath modern Earth. Each discovery adds another quiet detail to humanity's long story beside the rivers. Civilization survives through accumulation rather than perfection. Like canals gathering water from many streams, historical understanding grows slowly from countless small preserved traces of ordinary existence, as twilight deepens across the Mesopotamian plains. Workers return home, carrying worn tools, while distant temple fires flicker softly against the fading horizon. Beyond the city walls, shepherds guide animals toward quiet shelters beneath emerging stars and cooling night air. Great libraries rest silently behind stone walls, holding stories that will remain hidden for countless centuries ahead. Even after empires disappear, the rivers continue flowing past abandoned foundations and weathered walls where birds cast moving shadows across ancient brick beneath the evening sky. You stand quietly within Mesopotamia's long fading twilight, listening to reeds whisper beside dark canals. Around you, civilizations drift gently, like changing seasons, while ordinary life continues patiently beneath slow and distant stars. By the 6th century BCE, Babylon still rises proudly beside the Euphrates River. Though new powers gather quietly beyond distant horizons, you travel slowly along caravan roads where merchants, scribes, and travelers exchange goods beneath wide, desert skies fading into evening gold. History continues unfolding gently across Mesopotamia, not through sudden endings, but through gradual transitions carried softly from one empire into another. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia enters Babylon during a campaign that historians describe as remarkably restrained compared to many ancient conquests. Contemporary records suggest the city experiences little widespread destruction during the transition of power. Life continues within its walls, beneath new administration. Even enormous political change sometimes arrives less like thunder and more like someone calmly rearranging furniture overnight. You walk through Babylon's streets as merchants reopen market stalls beneath woven awnings while priests continue rituals within ancient temples beside the river. The city remains active, organized, and familiar, despite shifting authority above it. Farmers still guide water through irrigation canals. Bakers still prepare bread before sunrise. Somewhere nearby, a donkey almost certainly refuses cooperation. During an otherwise peaceful delivery schedule, the Persian Empire gradually expands into one of the largest political systems the ancient world has ever known, stretching from Mesopotamia toward Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond. Governing such diversity requires flexibility rather than complete cultural replacement. Persian rulers often preserve local customs, administrators, and religious traditions within conquered territories. Empires endure longer when they absorb existing systems, instead of attempting to erase every familiar structure immediately. One remarkable artifact from this period is the Cyrus cylinder, a clay inscription discovered in Babylon during the 19th century after centuries hidden beneath the earth. Many historians later view the text as an early expression of religious tolerance and respectful governance toward the many different peoples living throughout the expanding Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. Although scholars still debate the exact meaning and political purpose of the inscription, the cylinder continues holding quiet historical significance today. Rather than describing authority entirely through fear or destruction, the text presents a ruler emphasizing restoration, stability, and cooperation within conquered lands. Beneath the calm language of ancient clay, imperial power begins taking on a gentler public voice. You imagine scribes carefully pressing cuneiform signs into the damp clay cylinder, while warm light flickers across palace walls during a quiet Babylonian evening. The inscription describes temples restored and displaced communities allowed to return home under Persian rule. Ancient political messaging clearly already exists in sophisticated form. Humanity apparently discovers very early that leaders prefer describing themselves as thoughtful caretakers rather than complicated administrators, managing endless logistical challenges. As Persian authority spreads across Mesopotamia, many earlier Babylonian systems remain intact beneath the new imperial structure. Existing roads, canals, legal traditions, and administrative practices continue functioning with gradual adaptation rather than abrupt replacement. Civilization often evolves through layering instead of complete reinvention. Like cities built atop older foundations, human societies carry previous eras quietly within their newest forms and institutions. Caravan routes connecting Mesopotamia with the eastern Mediterranean grow increasingly active beneath Persian administration. Traders carry textiles, metals, spices, glass, and written records across astonishing distances through deserts and mountain passes. Ideas travel alongside merchandise. Systems of governance, accounting, and law spread slowly through human contact, much like seeds drifting unnoticed across wide landscapes before quietly taking root in distant soil. You rest beside a roadside caravan shelter where travelers share dates, bread, and stories gathered from cities scattered across the empire. Some speak different languages, yet trade creates practical forms of understanding between strangers meeting beneath unfamiliar stars. Empires often appear vast and abstract from afar, but their true foundations rest upon countless ordinary conversations beside roads, wells, marketplaces, and flickering evening fires. The Persians also maintain an impressive communication network, using royal roads and mounted couriers, traveling between administrative centers across enormous territories. Messages move more efficiently than before, strengthening imperial coordination while supporting commerce and governance. Ancient infrastructure quietly shapes history in profound ways. Even today, civilizations function noticeably better when important information arrives before everyone has already become thoroughly confused and slightly irritated. Meanwhile, older Mesopotamian traditions continue influencing neighboring cultures. Through scholarship, astronomy, mathematics, and written administration preserved across generations, Babylonian observations of celestial movement eventually contribute to later scientific traditions throughout the Mediterranean and Near East. Knowledge flows gradually between civilizations rather than remaining isolated within borders. Human understanding behaves much like river water, constantly moving and quietly reshaping everything it touches. You gaze upward into the clear desert sky where stars emerge above distant ruins and sleeping caravan camps scattered across the plains. Ancient astronomers once studied these same constellations from Babylonian temples centuries earlier. Different empires rise beneath identical heavens, while human curiosity remains remarkably consistent. Across history, people continue looking upward at night, wondering about time, order, destiny, and tomorrow's weather conditions. Historians often describe civilization as a succession of separate empires, replacing one another completely. Yet, reality appears far more interconnected when viewed closely. Legal systems borrow from earlier customs. Languages absorb older vocabulary. Religious practices blend gradually through contact and adaptation. The ancient world evolves through continuity as much as change. Human societies resemble layered rivers more than isolated monuments standing entirely alone. As evening deepens across Mesopotamia, cool air drifts softly over caravan roads stretching toward distant horizons beneath silver moonlight. Dust rises gently behind passing travelers, while temple bells sound faintly from faraway settlements. The landscape itself feels patient and enduring. Political authority shifts repeatedly across centuries, yet the plains continue holding the quiet echoes of every civilization that once settles beside these rivers. You begin sensing history not as separate worlds collapsing into silence, but as overlapping voices fading softly into one another across time. Babylon carries traces of Sumer, while Persia quietly inherits pieces of Babylon. Nothing disappears completely beneath the desert sky. Like footsteps softening within sand, each civilization leaves impressions carried forward through memory. Language, architecture, tradition, and law. Night settles fully over ancient caravan routes, while stars shimmer above silent canals, and weathered city walls cooling beneath drifting desert wind. Somewhere beyond the darkness, merchants continue slow journeys between cultures linked through trade and shared experience. In Mesopotamia's fine dust, history moves onward gently, like an echo dissolving peacefully into cold air before dawn arrives. Across the ancient Middle East, countless clay tablets survive quietly beneath layers of earth. Because the region's dry climate preserves them across astonishing stretches of time, you imagine forgotten rooms collapsing gently over stacks of records, while centuries pass silently overhead. Heat hardens the clay naturally. What once feels temporary and ordinary slowly becomes durable enough to outlast entire kingdoms and wandering generations. Many surviving tablets contain no dramatic stories of kings, wars, or sacred ceremonies. Instead, they record practical details from ordinary life beside the rivers and canals of Mesopotamia. Some list bread rations distributed to laborers. Others track barley beer prepared for modest temple gatherings. Ancient bureaucracy leaves behind surprisingly humble traces, proving civilization depends heavily upon accounting systems and very organized storage habits. You sit quietly beside imagined scribes working within cool mud brick rooms, while afternoon sunlight filters softly through narrow windows above their desks. They press cuneiform marks into damp clay with careful patience, recording deliveries of grain, livestock, oil, and woven cloth. Their work feels repetitive, yet essential. Somewhere nearby, another scribe probably sighs deeply after discovering an unfortunate counting mistake involving several sheep. Modern archaeologists learn extraordinary amounts about Mesopotamian society through these ordinary, administrative records preserved beneath ruined cities. The tablets reveal wages, trade patterns, agricultural schedules, legal agreements, and family relationships across centuries of changing political authority. History becomes less abstract through such details. Entire civilizations slowly emerge from lists of grain shipments, missing tools, delayed taxes, and carefully measured beer allocations. You notice how peaceful many of these records feel, compared with dramatic historical narratives focused entirely upon conquest and empire. Most people in ancient Mesopotamia spend their lives farming, trading, building homes, raising children, and maintaining canals, rather than participating in famous battles. Archaeology gently restores attention toward these quieter experiences. Human civilization rests mostly upon ordinary days unfolding steadily beneath familiar skies. In some excavated cities, archaeologists discover tablets still arranged neatly upon shelves where scribes leave them thousands of years earlier. Fire occasionally hardens the clay accidentally during invasions or building collapses, preserving documents even more securely. Destruction, paradoxically, protects memory. History sometimes survives through strange accidents, rather like losing an important letter only to rediscover it decades later. Inside an unexpectedly sturdy old coat pocket, the tablets quietly reveal how interconnected Mesopotamian society becomes through administration, trade, and organized labor across growing cities and farmlands. Grain from distant fields supports urban populations, while craftsmen receive food payments carefully recorded by temple officials. Civilization begins resembling a vast woven net sustained through daily communication, measurement, cooperation, and patient record-keeping, repeated across generations. You walk slowly through the quiet halls of a modern museum where ancient tablets rest behind protective glass beneath soft lighting and carefully controlled temperatures. Visitors pause silently before them, studying symbols impressed into clay more than 4,000 years ago. The atmosphere feels calm and reflective. Museums create unusual conversations between distant centuries, conducted entirely through objects that no longer possess living voices. Some tablets still preserve the fingerprints of ancient scribes, pressed accidentally along their edges, while shaping wet clay before writing begins. Those faint marks remain visible today beneath museum lights, connecting modern observers directly with individual people from forgotten worlds. The feeling becomes strangely intimate. Across immense distances of time, a simple human touch survives quietly longer than countless palaces, armies, and royal ambitions. You imagine the anonymous scribe pausing briefly during work while adjusting the tablet? Within warm hands, beside an oil lamp flickering against mud brick walls? Perhaps outside, evening wind moves through reeds beside nearby canals while neighbors prepare meals within shaded courtyards? The moment itself feels entirely ordinary. Yet, thousands of years later, that unnoticed fingerprint becomes one of history's gentlest surviving human signatures. Historians often concentrate upon rulers, whose names appear carved prominently into monumental inscriptions and royal records. Yet humble clay tablets reveal a far quieter civilization beneath those official stories. Bakers, merchants, laborers, fishermen, and administrators all leave traces through contracts, receipts, inventories, and small daily exchanges preserved carefully within the archaeological record of ancient Mesopotamia. Through these ordinary records, ancient society becomes visible not through spectacle or conquest, but through gradual accumulation across generations of everyday life. Most human history unfolds quietly inside kitchens, workshops, marketplaces, and canal-side homes, rather than upon battlefields. Civilization ultimately writes the greater part of its story through repeated routines, patient labor, and the calm rhythm of ordinary existence. The survival of ancient records quietly reminds you how fragile human memory remains. Despite every effort to preserve it across centuries, countless clay tablets disappear through erosion, flooding, looting, and neglect, leaving only fragments from worlds now mostly silent. Archaeology often feels like listening beside a river at night, hearing distant echoes carried softly through darkness inside modern laboratories. Scholars use photography, digital scanning, and careful translation techniques to study damaged tablets whose symbols fade gradually with time. Technology allows ancient voices to emerge slowly once more from worn clay surfaces beneath controlled light. Across thousands of years, human curiosity continues, reaching backward gently, hoping to recover forgotten fragments of shared experience. You pause before a small tablet recording, nothing more remarkable than deliveries of barley and bread to workers repairing irrigation channels outside an ancient city. Yet this modest record contains enormous meaning. It confirms that civilization depends fundamentally upon feeding people, maintaining infrastructure, and coordinating labor peacefully across communities. Even the grandest empire ultimately rests upon practical concerns involving food, water, and cooperative human effort beyond museum walls. Modern cities continue buzzing with traffic, glowing screens, and endless streams of information moving invisibly through digital systems. Yet the ancient tablets remain quietly understandable. Despite their age, humans still organize resources, exchange labor, maintain records, and seek stability within complex societies. The materials change from clay to glass screens, but many underlying patterns remain surprisingly familiar. Beneath civilization's evolving surfaces, as evening settles softly beyond the museum windows, warm light reflects across the ancient clay surfaces resting silently within their glass cases. The fingerprints of forgotten scribes remain visible beneath gentle illumination, untouched by the passing centuries surrounding them. In that quiet modern gallery, you sense how every empire begins not with monuments or conquest, but with ordinary people breathing steadily while recording the small details of everyday life. Across thousands of years, the rivers of Mesopotamia continue shifting their courses slowly through plains shaped by floodwater, sediment, and endless seasonal change. You stand beside landscapes where ancient channels once carried life toward thriving cities now buried beneath sand and modern settlements. Geography itself never remains completely still. Even rivers eventually wander away quietly, like old travelers following unfamiliar roads toward distant horizons. Many ancient Mesopotamian cities now rest deep beneath the surface of present-day Iraq, layered invisibly beneath farms, towns, and expanding modern neighborhoods. Eridu, Ur, Babylon, and countless smaller settlements survive mostly as archaeological mounds, rising gently from the earth. These places resemble sleeping memories, beneath dust and sunlight. Entire civilizations wait patiently underground while ordinary modern life continues moving quietly above them each day. You walk across broad desert plains, where broken pottery fragments occasionally emerge from dry soil. After seasonal winds disturb the surface, beneath your feet lie walls, courtyards, canals, and forgotten rooms once filled with voices and lamplight. The silence feels calm rather than empty. Time does not erase the past completely. Instead, it covers history gradually, layer by layer. Like blankets settling softly across sleeping ground, in museum storage rooms, far from the rivers that first surrounded them. Statues, once representing immense royal authority, now stand quietly beneath pale yellow lights glowing through the night. Dust gathers gently along carved stone surfaces, while archivists catalog fragments carefully inside climate-controlled spaces. Power changes strangely across centuries. What once commands armies eventually becomes an object studied silently by scholars wearing soft gloves and reading labels. Some statues still display the confident expressions of kings who once believed their reigns would endure forever, beneath divine protection and monumental architecture. Yet their empires disappear long ago, leaving behind only weathered stone faces gazing calmly into museum silence. There is something unexpectedly peaceful about this transformation. Time softens even the grandest ambitions until they resemble quiet echoes resting gently within carefully organized storage shelves. Modern scientists now use satellite imagery and remote sensing technology to identify traces of ancient irrigation. Canals hidden beneath deserts and cultivated land. From high above the earth, faint patterns reveal waterways abandoned thousands of years earlier. Through environmental change and shifting settlement patterns, technology becomes a new archaeological lantern. Humanity continues searching patiently for forgotten landscapes, using tools ancient scribes could never imagine. Beneath their star-filled skies, you imagine researchers studying glowing satellite maps late into the evening while tracing pale lines across digital screens representing vanished canals beneath modern terrain. These discoveries help historians reconstruct how Mesopotamian civilizations manage agriculture and urban growth across difficult environments. Even ancient water systems leave subtle fingerprints upon the land. Apparently, irrigation canals, much like family recipes, possess remarkable persistence across surprisingly long stretches of time, as rivers alter their paths and populations relocate gradually over centuries. Many once thriving settlements lose access to reliable water or trade routes supporting their survival. Cities shrink quietly rather than disappearing overnight. Houses crumble slowly beneath wind and weather while new communities emerge elsewhere along fresher channels. Civilization behaves less like permanent architecture and more like flowing currents. Adapting continuously to changing environmental conditions around them, you pause beside the ruins of a collapsed mud brick wall glowing softly beneath evening sunlight while warm wind carries fine dust across the open plain. Somewhere beneath the earth nearby may rest tablets, tools, or forgotten household objects untouched for millennia. Archaeology often depends upon extraordinary patience. Entire chapters of history remain hidden, simply because no one has yet placed a careful shovel in exactly the correct location. The legal codes, once carved proudly into stone, also become artifacts, over time, removed gradually from active life and placed within historical memory instead. Laws once considered eternal eventually survive only as inscriptions studied by students and museum visitors. Human certainty rarely remains permanent across centuries. Even the most carefully constructed systems settle eventually into the earth. Like quiet sediment deposited beneath slow and ancient rivers. Historians reading these old laws today notice how deeply they reflect the environments and assumptions of their own eras. Rules concerning irrigation, agriculture, trade, and social hierarchy emerge directly from the needs of Mesopotamian life beside unpredictable rivers. Civilization always writes itself into its laws. Future generations then study those rules. Like fossils, preserving traces of vanished landscapes and long-forgotten social climates. You lift your eyes toward the night. Sky stretching silently above ruined cities and dark plains where ancient canals once glimmer beneath moonlight. The stars move steadily overhead with nearly unchanged patterns from those observed by the first Mesopotamian astronomers thousands of years earlier. Human history feels brief beneath such cosmic rhythms. Empires rise and fade while constellations continue their patient journeys beyond earthly concerns and political boundaries. Ancient scribes once climbed temple stairways after sunset to observe celestial movement across clear desert skies, recording planetary cycles and lunar phases upon clay tablets beneath flickering lamps. Their observations contribute eventually to astronomy, mathematics, and calendar systems, influencing later civilizations across vast distances. Curiosity survives remarkably well through time. Humans continue gazing upward at night, searching for order within enormous and mysterious spaces above them. Today, modern cities glow beneath electric light, while satellites orbit high above the same landscapes where scribes once studied stars from ziggurat rooftops. Technology changes dramatically, yet certain human experiences remain familiar across millennia. People still wonder about time, memory, and existence beneath the night sky. Civilization evolves continuously, but the quiet act of looking upward endures with almost comforting consistency throughout history. You begin understanding how every empire, law, and monument eventually joins the archaeological record, waiting beneath layers of dust and interpretation. Nothing truly escapes time's gradual movement across the earth, yet this realization feels soothing rather than tragic. The world continues carrying traces of every civilization forward, preserving fragments softly within landscapes, languages, traditions, and human curiosity itself beneath endlessly shifting skies. Far above the buried cities of Mesopotamia, constellations drift slowly through the darkness exactly as they do when the first scribes pause beside rivers to study the heavens. Thousands of years ago, cool night air settles across silent ruins while distant stars continue their patient motion beyond human memory. Beneath that endless sky, history rests quietly within the earth, carried gently forward by the weight of passing time. When viewed across geological ages stretching through millions of years, the rise and fall of ancient empires begins to resemble only faint ripples spreading briefly across an enormous still lake. You sit quietly beside the memory of Mesopotamia while time expands far beyond human measurement. Kingdoms once considered eternal appear suddenly delicate, like footprints fading slowly beside the edges of patient rivers at dusk. The laws carved carefully into basalt and clay once stand proudly within temples, palaces, and administrative halls filled with torchlight and ceremony. Rulers believe these inscriptions will preserve order forever beneath the protection of gods and kings. Yet, eventually, the stones crack, cities collapse, and rivers carry fresh sediment across abandoned foundations. Even the strongest monuments return softly to earth through endless seasons of wind and silence. You walk slowly through the ruins of Babylon beneath a sky, turning pale with evening stars, while warm desert air drifts gently between broken columns. Worn smooth by centuries of weather, sand gathers quietly inside forgotten courtyards where officials once discussed taxes, irrigation, and royal decrees. The atmosphere feels calm rather than mournful. Time does not destroy angrily. It simply continues moving forward without interruption or urgency. Across Mesopotamia, Ancient canals now appear only as faint impressions, beneath dry plains, where grasses sway softly under moonlight. Water once flows steadily through these channels, carrying life toward farms, villages, and crowded cities beside the rivers. Today, many remain invisible beneath layers of earth. Yet their paths still shape the land quietly, like memories lingering gently beneath ordinary conversation long after voices fade. Somewhere beneath the dark desert soil, undiscovered clay tablets may still rest untouched inside collapsed rooms, sealed by time and shifting sediment. Perhaps they contain legal records, trade agreements, astronomical notes, or simple lists of bread distributed during forgotten ceremonies beside ancient temples. History sleeps patiently underground. The earth continues holding countless human stories in silence, waiting calmly for hands that may never arrive. You imagine archaeologists, many generations from now, brushing dust carefully away from newly uncovered tablets beneath soft morning light. They pause quietly while ancient symbols emerge once again after thousands of years hidden from human sight. The moment feels almost sacred in its gentleness. Across immense distances of time, forgotten voices continue returning softly through clay, patience, curiosity, and the steady persistence of human wonder. The rivers themselves remain older than every empire rising beside their banks. Long before Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, or Persia appear upon the plains, floodwaters already shape the earth through endless cycles of erosion and renewal. Long after those civilizations disappear, the rivers continue flowing beneath changing skies. Nature holds a rhythm far larger than human ambition, moving calmly beyond every temporary structure built beside it. You rest beside imagined reeds, whispering quietly near dark water while distant stars reflect faintly upon the river's surface. The night feels vast and unhurried. Somewhere nearby, perhaps, ancient travelers once pause in similar silence, listening to insects, wind, and slow currents beneath the same constellations overhead. Across thousands of years, certain moments of stillness remain almost unchanged within the human experience of the world. Historians and archaeologists dedicate lifetimes to reconstructing fragments from these vanished civilizations through broken pottery, damaged inscriptions, buried walls, and forgotten tools preserved beneath the earth. Yet, even the most detailed understanding remains incomplete. Much of ancient life disappears forever into silence. There is something peaceful within accepting this mystery. Not every story requires perfect recovery in order to leave meaning behind. The old legal codes now survive, mostly inside museums, libraries, and scholarly translations studied beneath electric light, far removed from their original worlds. Students read them carefully, while researchers debate their meanings across universities and archives throughout the modern world. Yet outside those quiet rooms, rivers still flow and stars still move overhead. The universe continues its ancient motion with extraordinary patience and almost immeasurable calm. You begin noticing how civilizations resemble temporary shelters built beside enormous cosmic processes unfolding far beyond individual lifetimes. Humans create laws, cities, temples, and empires, hoping to establish permanence within changing landscapes. Yet permanence itself remains elusive beneath geological time. The earth shifts slowly, rivers wander gradually, and even mountains wear down grain by grain beneath the endless passage of wind and water above the plains of Mesopotamia. The constellations continue traveling across the heavens with rhythms nearly identical to those observed by the earliest scribes standing beside temple walls thousands of years earlier. Ancient astronomers watch these same stars while recording movements upon damp clay beneath oil lamps. Modern observers look upward still. Across all civilizations, humanity remains quietly connected by the simple act of gazing into the night sky. You breathe slowly while cool desert air settles. across forgotten ruins and distant riverbanks beneath the darkness. The sounds around you become softer now. Wind moves gently through dry grass. Water flows faintly somewhere beyond sight. Far overhead, stars shimmer without urgency above landscapes carrying the accumulated memory of countless generations who once live, labor, dream, and disappear beneath these same endless heavens. In the deep stillness of night, the ancient world no longer feels distant or lost. Instead, it rests quietly within the earth, within language, within law, and within the patient continuity of human curiosity itself. Every empire leaves traces behind, like fading warmth inside stone after sunset. Time carries those traces gently forward, not preserving everything perfectly, but never allowing the past to vanish completely either. Now, the winds crossing Mesopotamia move softly between ruined walls and broken pillars worn smooth by centuries of shifting sand. The rivers continue their slow journeys beneath moonlight, while unseen tablets remain sleeping beneath layers of soil and silence. Everything settles gradually into stillness. History grows quiet beneath the stars, becoming less a story of conquest, and more a long whisper carried carefully through endless night. You remain beneath the ancient sky a little longer, listening as every sound becomes softer and farther away. The wind drifts slowly across the plains. Water murmurs faintly in the distance. Above you, the same constellations continue their patient movement through darkness without beginning or end. The world rests peacefully now, wrapped in silence, dust, memory, and the calm breathing of time itself. The script comes to a close. Thank you all for listening.